Hi there. Welcome to Discussions with the Fascia Masters. My name is Deanna Hansen. I'm the founder of Fluid Isometrics and Block Therapy, and I have an incredibly special guest, Dr. Beverly Yates. I was interviewed by Dr. Yates on the Reversing Type 2 Diabetes Summit, and we had so much in common. We had such a great conversation. I knew that I had to have her as a guest so she could share her wisdom with all of you. And normally I don't read a bio, but I'm going to this time because it is so very impressive. Dr. Beverly Yates is a licensed doctor of naturopathic medicine. She is the nation's leader in online type 2 diabetes care. Her virtual practice has programs and supplements to help people lower their blood sugar naturally at home without ever having to step foot in a clinic. Dr. Yates is on a mission to help 3 million people heal from type 2 diabetes and prediabetes. She used her background in MIT electrical engineering and work as a systems engineer in Silicon Valley to create effective online programs for people with diabetes to achieve blood sugar control and live the life they love. Dr. Yates is an internationally recognized speaker and expert in diabetes and heart disease. She is a published author of Heart Health for Black Women, a natural approach to healing and preventing heart disease, and co-author of multiple books, including with Jack Canfield, The Soul of Success, Volume 2. Dr. Yates is writing a new book on type 2 diabetes and prediabetes based on her Yates Protocol, focusing on 5 practical, enjoyable steps to reversing type 2 and prediabetes. Dr. Yates has been featured in numerous media outlets. I will let you read all of those. I am so incredibly thrilled to have you here so that you can share first your passion around this topic, as well as your approach and all the wonderful things we're going to be talking about. So welcome.
Thank you, Deanna. I love that. You know, we had such a great connection when I was interviewing you for my Reversing Diabetes, Type 2 Diabetes online summit. And in that, we were both talking about flow and structural issues, root cause things that just interfere with people feeling well. And, you know, our basic agreement around people deserve to feel well, right? So I'm glad to be here. Thank you for this invitation.
Oh, my pleasure. So first of all, what got you so impassioned about helping people with type 2 diabetes specifically?
Great question. So it's 2 parts to that answer. One is that I noticed in the 90s and the early 2000s how many more people were coming in clinically who needed help with their blood sugar. It was this big jump. Like before, if you had been practicing, I would imagine 70s or 80s, you would have seen a big jump in heart disease. That's before my time and this work. But in seeing that shift and an increase in all these blood sugar problems in the 90s and into the 2000s, I was like, whoa, there's this growing trend. Now we know very clearly from the numbers and data worldwide what a big deal blood sugar management is, right? We've seen this big rise in prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. So that was one, was just getting in front of what I was seeing my patients come into the clinic showing as a problem. The other piece was I got connected with my biological father's side of my family. I didn't grow up with them. My parents were divorced when I was about a year old. And long story short, as I reclaimed that relationship as an adult and got to know folks, I realized that he was one of 13 siblings, all of whom had some kind of diabetes, including type 1. When I realized that that prevalence was 100%, I was like, oh, wow, I've got a genetic exposure here I didn't know about. So my initial concern had been to help others. And then my concerns was like, I need to be able to help myself. So here we are.
That's fascinating that 13 out of 13 siblings all
Crazy.
had that. Is that common today that an entire, no.
No, it's usually not 100%. It might be 30% or 40% of people's family, but it's not usually 100. 100 is ridiculous. That's a lot.
So do you see any reason why all these siblings in this one family had this condition?
I think several things come into play. One is the lack of equitable treatment in terms of just the root cause issues around lifestyle and the fact that people are not supported with good information about the basics, you know, those 5 things that I talk about in the Yates Protocol. Nutrition is obviously the bullseye of our target. That's true for everyone. Sleep is underappreciated in terms of being a way to regulate your blood sugar and stay healthy. Third would be stress. Stress is always the bully. It will grab people by their genetic collar and slam them up against the epigenetic wall of expression. So if it's lurking in your genes and if the right set of circumstances, or you might say the wrong set of circumstances, unfold in your life around stress, this is what will be expressed. You will show up with type 2 diabetes, prediabetes. Fourth would be exercise. And you can't out-exercise a bad diet. you cannot exercise your way around diabetes. You need to pay attention to other things. Exercise by itself will not solve this issue. And 5 is meal timing. Whether or not you're doing restricted time windows for eating, you're doing intermittent fasting, maybe you're fasting as part of a religious or spiritual discipline, things of that nature. It has a role to play in helping to reset and reestablish a healthy blood sugar.
That's amazing. You've certainly covered the gamut there. So when it comes to compromised blood sugar and blood flow and fatigue, like what is it that you see as a motivator for people to want to get better, and that stops them from trying to find the right path to getting better?
That's a great question. Okay, let's unpack that one. So the first thing that I see as a desire, something they want, is that they want to reclaim their former self. I was just talking with a patient yesterday, and she said it so beautifully. She said, "I feel like me again. Thank you." I was like, oh, perfect. Because when we're working together, I'm trying to establish where that person recognizes their own improvement. We can have lab tests up the wazoo all day long, and I'm a big fan of test don't guess. But that person's lived experience in their own skin and their own spirit has to feel good. Otherwise, our treatment isn't effective. I think most of us as practitioners would agree about that, right? The person has to be able to tell it made a difference. I think the other factor to consider is that a lot of times people are given a lot of misinformation. Some of it's based in mythology, some of it's complete nonsense, and some of it is stuff that never worked. That old 1950s advice of eat less and move more in today's busy, complicated world, we could call that cortisol nation. People are just stressed out around the world. It's not adequate. It's no longer that simple. I don't know if it ever was. It surely is not in today's world. I know plenty of people who come in and they are doing smart stuff. They have done their homework and they're still not enjoying healthy levels of blood sugar on a regular basis.
I bet this convenience-filled world has certainly impacted, people don't cook anymore. Everybody's going to restaurants because everybody's rushing. So people aren't even chewing their food. I mean, the whole process of, it's not just about what we eat, but it's also how we eat. And I think that's such a big factor too. So what's the first thing that you educate people on when they come to see you?
Yeah, well, we can start right here in that whole idea of fast food and convenience food. And I just feel like, you're saving time, maybe saving money with those foods, but then you're spending that time later on with the doctors and other health professionals. So you're not really saving time. You're better off cooking your own food and eating food from scratch. So you could consider, what is it we're really trying to do, right? What are people actually trying to accomplish in today's busy world? They're trying to get more done with less time and often less resources. Less resources could mean money. It could mean opportunity or access to things that will actually make life enjoyable. And when it comes to something like type 2 diabetes or prediabetes, people are often struggling with their emotional inner world. Sometimes they're in turmoil. They feel really conflicted. There's too many asks in their day and not enough answers. One of the things I've discovered, and is something I'm encapsulating in that book, is talking about the journey of the caregiver. Because many people are in caregiver roles. Now, there's obvious ones where some people are caregiving for maybe elderly or ailing parents, and maybe at the same time they're caring for children, perhaps younger children or teenagers or something like that, or maybe they have an adult child who's struggling. Other people are in roles where they are the key member, like members of the armed forces, members in the military. They often have a situation where they're in sometimes extreme circumstances at a moment's notice, right? And as a result, they get that burst of cortisol that makes all the difference in the execution of that military mission. But this sets up this pattern for them that years later shows up as type 2 diabetes, right? Because they had all those bursts of extra blood sugar and no realistic way to burn it off. There's a lot of different ways in which blood sugar can become deranged. And as such, it's interesting to see how often it isn't the case where someone stereotypically partied their way to a type 2 diabetes diagnosis or a prediabetes diagnosis. People always think they know the backstory, and some people are so incredibly judgmental. They're really just exposing their own ignorance. It is quite easy, sadly, in today's world to become pre-diabetic, type 2 diabetic without having, eaten buckets of ice cream, bags and bags of potato chips and cookies. That often is not the case. It's kind of shocking, actually. People often think, oh, they deserve this. That's what you get for not taking care of yourself. I say, number one, how dare you be that judgmental? You haven't walked in that person's shoes. You don't know their story. Number two, what if someone is eating a healthy diet, has exercised regularly, does strength training, all the good stuff? It's still not working. Do you know whether or not they've had toxic exposures to nasty chemicals? in today's world, most of us have been exposed to things since childhood. I personally grew up in Philadelphia, in South Philadelphia, by the refineries, and there were days where the air smelled terrible and looked worse. So I didn't choose that, but here I am today, right? On and on. I mean, I just think the attitude that goes on around the blaming and the shaming of people with diabetes and the assumption that they have somehow decided to screw up their own health. Look, listen, Deanna, you and I both know this, right? No one gets up in the morning and says, how can I screw up my health today? Like, that's not how people work, right? That's not how this starts. And if you constantly have a situation where you're giving, and not getting enough back, that energy exchange isn't even, it's a great setup for this problem.
Wow, great explanation. And I mean, we're just so flogged. I mean, right now here, I'm looking out my window and I mean, like our blue sunny sky is smoke filled because there's, fires all around. So there's this. And, I remember interviewing somebody that shared that like since the 1950s, there's 144,000 more toxins that our bodies are absorbing.
Yes.
And then of course, the whole social media thing. And I mean, from my perspective with fascia, pain, fear, and stress cause us to reactively hold the breath. If we're not breathing, I mean, everything gets frozen. We're not feeding oxygen. So, I mean, it is incredible that people become so judgmental on these topics when really the world in general is suffering from sickness.
It is. We've had our share of the wildfire disasters here in California. So I didn't realize that where you're at is also under wildfire threat. I remember reading last week that there were wildfires in Western Canada, and I didn't know about it until last week. I wish our news wasn't so, local. Sometimes I wish we had a much bigger picture, because I really feel like our environment around the planet, we are all under some kind of environmental threat, whether it's extremes from water, from fire, from air, from other things in our natural world. I think the planet's fighting back against our foolishness and not is feeling the impact evenly. The people who make the decisions don't live on a separate planet. And so the rest of us get stuck with some really poor decisions. When it comes to fascia, the diaphragm, one of the things that I love about your work and what you shared is, if we can unpack that, let's talk about how the relationship of that deeper breathing and the diaphragm and stress and that parasympathetic versus sympathetic nervous system tone, how this all relates, because blood sugar is going to track that. I really see a big overlap here.
So on that rest and digest mode, let's talk more about sleep.
Yeah.
And your protocol around that and how important that is.
Sleep is amazing and it is so underappreciated. People appreciate it when they don't have it. When they have it, they just take it for granted, right? The ability to be able to go to sleep in a short amount of time, let's say 3 to 5 minutes after your head hits the pillow, and have restorative sleep, to have enough in the way of deep sleep, and to have the lighter stages of sleep. Deep sleep is when the brain does all of its cleansing and resetting, right? So essential, particularly if you're trying to make sure you have brain health as you age and avoid Alzheimer's and dementia. Making sure that you don't have a busy mind, you aren't overly anxious or depressed, things like that, because anxiety and other things will interfere with the ability to get that restorative sleep, right? Do you ever enter the dream state and then to awaken and go, hey, carpe diem, seize the day. I am ready for my day. If your sleep is disrupted, if your sleep is a hot mess, this doesn't happen. By the way, while you're asleep, your blood sugar is supposed to reset because you're not eating. You're fasting when you're asleep. It's a natural fasting state, right? Not eating, not drinking. The gut goes, whoo, we get a chance to rest. We got a break here. And all of the repair cycles throughout all of the body, whether it's your joints, your fascia, your tendons, your cartilage, your skin, your soul, your spirit, your bone marrow, like everything is resetting. And in that process, if you're not sleeping well, that means foundationally, the resets aren't happening. They're not happening for your blood, not happening for your gut, your brain, etc. And it's hard to play catch up. If you can imagine a factory that runs 24/7, at some point, people have the factory rest and they go and they repair the machines and do all these other things, right? Well, your body, like your joints are going to get a rest when you're asleep because you're not moving actively in a big way while you're asleep. But your brain and your heart have to keep going, right? They really aren't optional. They got to keep rolling or you're done. It's game over. So it's important that you have that healthy restorative sleep, because otherwise stuff just starts to break because the maintenance can't happen.
And is that time period for sleep the same, what is needed for everybody, or do some people need less, some people need more?
Great question. It does vary, and it varies throughout our lives. Toddlers and teenagers need the most sleep. If you've raised kids or if you remember your own childhood, you might just, resonate with that. Yeah, okay. I might not remember my toddler years, but as a teenager, I remember needing to sleep. Okay, because you're going from the child's body to the adult's body, the reproductive window is opening, and there's a lot of changes happening in the teen years. It makes sense. Then in our adult years, we pretty much, most of us need somewhere between
Oh, we got a little frozen here.
hours then when they hit their 60s or 70s.
Sorry, Dr. Yates, you just froze there for a brief moment when you started saying when we get into our adult years. If you could just repeat what you'd said.
Okay, great. Thank you for letting me know. When we get into our adult years, what we can find is that our needs for sleep can shift. So typically in our adult years, we're going to need 7 to 9 hours of sleep for most people. So that's why you hear the adage of 8 hours of sleep, right? It's in the middle of 7 and 9. Then from there, when people are in their elder years, often their sleep needs get to be smaller, but I don't know if I want to say it as sleep needs, because I'm thinking of like Dr. Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep, other people's research around this. I think there's a couple of things that happen around sleep. One is that the pineal gland in many people as they age starts to fill in with calcifications. And therefore the pineal gland doesn't release as much in the way of melatonin, right? So that's one compromising factor. Another can also be that sometimes that's a stage in life where a lot of the world's worries kind of crash in on our shoulders. It could be a time where, despite planning as best we could, anticipating this, that, and the other thing, things may not be going the way we need them to go. And it can be for circumstances that are out of our control. For instance, wildfires, right? There's people who get wiped out by these events. They didn't do anything bad or wrong personally, but there they are now, wiped out. Like, what do you do? Maybe in your 60s or 70s, it's not easy to restart at that point in life. Yeah. Other examples can happen. So when it comes to thinking about this, it's important to take the bigger picture in. So getting to bed at a regular time, awakening at a regular time, whether it's a weekend or a weekday, and on vacation times, try your best not to yank your body all over the clock. It's just too hard. That's one. Another is to make sure that your sleep environment is cool and dark. Maybe you have blackout curtains or just whatever you need to make it really, really dim. Like I remember once staying in a hotel in the Boston area. I couldn't believe this place. They had all these interior hotel rooms and they had these bright neon lights inside the hotel room along the walls and like hardly any curtains or shade. It was terrible. It was a complete disaster for sleep. I thought, is this a torture chamber? What are these people doing?
And then there's the sound. I mean, if you're living in the middle of a busy city and like, yes. I can't even imagine if you're in the middle of New York and you're trying to sleep. And I mean, the horns are constantly going and you never have this peace.
You don't have this peace, right? So your nervous system doesn't reset. So earplugs, eye masks, all those things, whatever you need to get that quiet, peaceful environment, a cool room, a bed that's comfortable. Hopefully it's not a foam mattress or something that will retain heat, because you could get too hot in that situation, particularly for women who are maybe in their perimenopausal years. This sometimes can add fuel to the fire of feeling hot flashes. It could be that their bedding material doesn't breathe and is just, turning them into a roaring oven, oven beyond whatever hormonal issues may have appeared. So just food for thought.
So from the perspective of sleeping in a colder room, which of course I think most people intuitively know because you just feel better when you do it. What beyond the women in like that space and that mode, is there another physiological reason for that?
Yes, it turns out, so how we know this is this interesting research that's been done on hibernating bears. Because of global warming and climate change, we've come to find that bears don't hibernate for as long as they used to. Sometimes they wake up much sooner. Typically, like for instance, here in California, the bears in the Sierras, right? For instance, they go foraging, they cause a real ruckus coming into places where humans are looking for food because they are awake much sooner than they normally would be. And the prey, the things they would normally eat, aren't necessarily awake. It's just them in the snow, right? So they're foraging for food. And so when they tested these bears, they've discovered they have elevated levels of an amino acid called glycine in their blood. And glycine helps with thermoregulation for mammals. This would include bears and humans. So we found that that's a factor, right? So sometimes a disruption from sleep can be helped with an amino acid called glycine. There's all these interesting interrelationships that we get, whether it's from other creatures, our fellow animals in the animal kingdom, or other things we can observe around sleep. But our sleep habits really do matter. They're very important. not being disrupted. If your sleep partner snores or otherwise is a active sleeper, one of these people who's like an octopus, their limbs every which way, they turn sideways in the bed. You just have to find a way to make sure that your sleep world is not thrown into chaos. If you have a sleep disorder like sleep apnea, that's another consideration. Make sure you get a sleep study, preferably at home because it's your actual environment. If you're in a lab, that's just not the same. If you can get sleep studies done at home, that's great. And if you're prescribed a CPAP, please use it. Make sure it's comfortable. And if it's not comfortable, go back and get refitted. They've got all kinds of gizmos and attachments to help people feel so much more comfortable than would have been true, say, 20, 30 years ago. That's gotten a lot of improvement.
Wow. Okay. So let's jump into the topic of exercise.
Yeah.
I think people are very confused about this topic and what's healthy exercise and what's not healthy exercise.
Right. Okay. So when it comes to exercise for blood sugar management, I say this is a great place to figure out what works for you. I found clinically that for some people, they are working too hard. Yes, that's right. They're exercising too hard. And their blood sugar just goes up, stays elevated. It should in response to exercise, but it should be a temporary elevation. Within 30 to 60 minutes after you stop the exercise, your blood sugar should come back to a healthy range, right? Why does it go up in response to exercise? Your blood sugar goes up because you have active working muscles. When you have active working muscles, they're going to do their response thing, right? So active working muscles are blood sugar sponges. When you're actively working out, your blood sugar is released to feed those muscles. Once you stop, it should reset, go back to the healthy range 30 to 60 minutes later. If it doesn't, it might mean you're working out too hard. Other people benefit from really calm, gentle exercise. So like walking might be fine for some people. The lighter end of spin bikes, gentle kinds of hikes, not climbing the Himalayas or the Sierras, just gentle hills, could be fine. Other people, they need more vigorous exercise. And you'll know this because you'll find if your blood sugar is not in a healthy range with the gentle exercise. So if that's not effective, then you might need to do things that are more vigorous. Something like high intensity interval training. You might need to jump rope, maybe dance to a really fast song, any kind of movement that really gets you going. Swim and maybe swim vigorously, or if you can only walk because of joint issues, walking as vigorously as you can, pumping your arms, and maybe you're carrying 2-pound weight in each hand just to make it a little more challenging, right? Some of us just need more vigorous activity. Some of us need to have chill out kinds of activities, but regular, consistent activity will make all the difference for blood sugar management.
Do you find that people that are really high stressed need more vigorous or less vigorous, or is that just, again, very individual?
Very individual. I haven't seen a clear correlation. Sometimes the high stress people need the contrast of being able to be calm, right? And doing that deeper diaphragmatic breathing, and the fast release is just a blessing because this helps them to finally get into that parasympathetic type B mode. And for other people, they need to burn off the cortisol. And so they're going to need more vigor. So if they're wearing a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor, or getting a drop of blood and testing their blood sugar with a glucometer and finger stick and test strips, those are great ways. Gather that blood sugar data and see what's going on. What's your blood sugar when you first wake up in the morning, your fasting morning sugar? What is it 30 minutes in an hour, 2 hours after you eat your meals? What is it like when you exercise, right? And if you're not seeing your blood sugar reset within that hour after you complete your exercise, consider changing what you're doing.
Okay, fascinating. Yeah. So we've talked about nutrition, about sleep, about stress, about exercise. And what's your fifth of your 5 steps?
Meal timing.
We like structure, don't we? Like sleep, we love structure. Yes.
We want structure, right? Our physical self wants structure, we just want structure. So here's the most common mistake that I see people make. So we're going to put this up front. Okay, Deanna. The biggest mistake I see people make is that, who have blood sugar problems specifically, they often skip lunch by accident. So they'll have breakfast, and breakfast may or may not be healthy, but they skip lunch. They go too long between breakfast and dinner. Therefore, by the time they go to eat dinner, they are starving. They're ravenous. They could eat a bear. And as a result, that's where they're more likely to make poor food choices because they're hungry. And what is easy to get when you're hungry? Fast food. What does fast food not offer us? Nutrient density, right? So you want to eat more of it because it didn't fulfill your need for nutrient. There's a reason.
Yeah, and I
They add
remember years
chemicals.
ago reading that we should always be in the 30 to 70% hunger range. We don't want to go to either extreme because then again we're ping-ponging.
Right.
And so to
Right.
stay in that range,
Yeah.
so what do you think of intermittent fasting?
I think it's great. I've always thought of intermittent fasting as being a fascinating topic for a number of reasons. One, we know that many religious and spiritual traditions have fasting built in. I think that that's a great thing. And I think there's a reason for that, right? Cultures around the world have come to the conclusion that this is a healing thing. It's good for us. Um, I also think in today's cortisol nation, hyper busy world, it is a great way to reconnect with what's really essential. And are we eating and doing things in a way that's meaningful, or is it just out of habit? Um, I think it's really easy to get out of control with this and to wind up overeating and not having it be something that we are intending to do, but it's happening. The other thing I'd like to touch on with meal timing, I think this is the right time to bring this in. We already talked about stress and sleep, right? So I didn't mention then, let's mention it now with respect to meal timing, the idea of two hormones I call the twin gremlins. They are leptin and ghrelin. Ghrelin is the hormone that's released when you're hungry. So think of ghrelin as the word growling. Ghrelin, growling, where your tummy will give out the growling noises when you're hungry, right? So if your body has normal signaling, it lets you know very clearly, hey, I'm hungry. Your stomach starts to growl, you could tell it's time to eat. If leptin is in good relationship with your body, leptin is another hormone. That's the one that signals when you are full, when you are satisfied. It signals satiety. When you reach satiation, you know it's time to stop eating. So with ghrelin, you start eating, leptin, you stop. When they're out of balance, you won't be able to easily tell that it's time to stop eating. And so it's easy to overeat when leptin is broken.
How does it get broken?
It can get broken from chronically poor sleep and entirely too much stress. Those are the two biggest players, in my opinion, that will affect it. And those will also alter your insulin sensitivity. You can become insulin resistant with poor sleep or chronic stress. You can become leptin resistant with, and ghrelin resistant in a different way, but leptin resistant primarily with poor sleep and too much stress. So it's so important to have these things in balance. And so eating the healthy foods, leafy greens at every meal, because they, just like active working muscles, leafy greens are also blood sugar sponges. Doing these things makes a difference. And yes, friends, I am saying have leafy greens as part of your breakfast. You can do it. I know people think it's weird, but hey, do what works, right? And this works.
I throw arugula into my morning smoothie every day. So
yeah. I like spinach or, a handful or two of the salad greens that are already prepped, or collard greens, Dino kale, whatever leafy greens you might have, beet greens, just green leafy vegetables, really. They just do wonders for us.
Absolutely. Okay. So you've packed a ton of information. Thank you so much for all of this. It's so incredibly helpful for our listeners. Is there more to the story, or have you pretty much summed up everything that you would be approaching with people coming to see you?
Yeah, I think the thing that I would add at this point is when it comes to movement and exercise, that if you're in pain or discomfort, I totally understand how hard it is to exercise when you aren't feeling well. And I feel like that needs to be addressed. I have seen sometimes that doctors will withhold care from people when they're in pain and tell them, oh, well, you have to lose weight first, and then you can have your knee replacement surgery or your hip replacement surgery. And I've always thought that that's cruel, because the reality is there's so many people struggling. We have much better data now than we had before. So the world of anesthesiology has come a long way. And so now it is safer to be able to monitor people and get them through a surgery. And so if their lack of articulation of mobility in a joint is what's keeping them from exercising, then let's solve the problem so they can get them moving again. I've seen the devastation that goes on when people's much needed surgeries, let's say for hip replacement or knee replacement, is delayed, and that person just gains more and more weight because they're not moving around because they're in severe pain. And the way pain meds work for most humans is they build up a tolerance for it. And so it becomes that they're on the treadmill, really, of increasing intensity, increasing amounts of dosages of said pain meds, and not getting the same pain relief. So I'm like, well, are we just torturing people? Why not just give them what they need, replace the joint, prescribe the physical therapy so they can fully recover, let the physical therapist help them get as much functional movement back, then, so it's forced me, frankly, Deanna, to be a better doctor. It's one of the reasons why I've put together the Yates Protocol so it does not require exercise. I'm not saying exercise isn't needed. Exercise is excellent. It's great for mood reset, for weight control, for blood sugar control, blah, 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 all the things. But if you can't exercise, it can still help you get a hold of that blood sugar and get back towards that healthy range. Because I've seen people held hostage like this. So I'm like, okay, now what do I do? I can't, I'm not a surgeon. I can't, I can't solve that part. So I'm just saying sometimes.
Well, and then you would get caught in a cycle. I mean, if you can't move and you're putting on more weight, you're becoming more depressed, you're not sleeping. So
right.
You get caught up into this cycle. And like, how do you ever find your way through that?
Exactly. And it causes its own stress and frustration, which does nothing but hijack that blood sugar. And now here it goes up, right?
And not to mention like how it's not even just the individual affected, like this affects families.
Yes, it absolutely affects families. You can see all the people that person is tied to, and it's all compromised. Now this person isn't able to join them on a walk after dinner or Thanksgiving meal or something like that, or to go for a hike or just simple things. It's all uncomfortable, unpleasant, and or impossible.
Well, and then you can see the extremes where people lose limbs, and I mean, all the, Oh, yeah. So let's talk about your protocol.
Okay. So with the protocol, one of the really beautiful things about it is I realized from my naturopathic medicine training how incredibly lifestyle sensitive blood sugar issues are. That is the joy. That is the opportunity for healing. That is there for everyone. And I also realized clinically with this experience that it's really, for most people, one or two central things of the 5 they need to pay attention to. So for some people, it's going to be sleep and nutrition. And they'll find that once they start to improve their sleep, that their cravings for food the next day after a night of poor sleep are gone. They just want to have normal, healthy foods, right? So if you're really stressed or you have poor sleep, the next morning, you're likely to wake up with cravings for high-calorie foods. They're either going to be sweet, high-calorie foods or umami, savory, high-calorie kinds of foods. That's because, back in the day, we didn't have a constant source of a food supply, and you were going to need enough calories to get through that moment. In today's cortisol nation world, that no longer applies. It becomes a problem, right? So, in terms of the protocol, we can adjust and shift. There's 1 to 2 key things that you'll need to focus in on. And if you can't do exercise, you aren't completely screwed. Things can still work for you. So don't feel like it's abandoned. Hope all ye who enter here, if you are unable to exercise. You can exercise, great. You'll get there faster. That's for sure.
And so your program is online. So how do people approach you? How do they get set up for figuring out what of these 5 steps they need to focus on? How does that work?
So they can connect with one of our programs. They can have the opportunity to work on their blood sugar issues specifically, and they can go to our website, which is naturalhealthcare.com, spelled naturalhealthcare.com. They can also go to Dr. Beverly Yates, Dr. like the abbreviation for doctor, so Dr. BEVERLYYATES.com, and sign up either for a quick meet and greet to just see if we're a good match to work together, or they can also get access to online programs that are intended for DIY, do it yourself, for those who are ready to go, and maybe for whom a one-on-one or group program is not a good fit. They have the opportunity to just, get the goodness in an online format. We also have supplements to help people on their healing journey to address the issues from the damage that blood sugar causes, because it is relentless and it is a whole body damage. It doesn't spare anything.
So you have a big goal. You want to help 3 million people. So how many people have you reached so far?
Between my work from before, earlier in the 2010s and now in the 2020s, and then with my online summit, I have another summit coming up, and then with the book coming out. So before we get to this year's summit and the book coming out, I can confidently say I've reached about 500,000 people, and I'm getting towards that 3 million people. I really want to be able to touch that many people's lives, because I know they will bring their friends and family with them, and we can really start to make a difference in these crazy numbers around the world, because this is just not sustainable for human health for us to be sick like this. It won't
Well, I
work.
have no doubt that you will reach your goal, and I'm certain that sharing this with my community, we're going to get a few more numbers in there for you. So
Great. Come one, come all.
yeah, thank you so much. Do you have any last words for our listeners that you'd like to share before we let them go?
Two things I'd like to share. One is please listen and take to heart whatever Deanna has to say. She cares about your well-being, and she's really trying to make sure you have what you need so that you can move and feel good in the body and the skin you're in. That's so important. I think that some of the world's miseries come from other people feeling not well and they start acting out. So please join in and take her work seriously and do what you need to follow through. My second comment would be is if you have a blood sugar stress issue, or if you know someone who has a blood sugar issue, would you kindly share this episode? Maybe we'll give them the inspiration, the encouragement to do the things that they need to do, either that they know they need to do or information they've never heard before. And finally, it's going to make some sense, because a lot of times people don't explain why these things are related.
Well, you are such an inspiration and a breath of fresh air. I'm, again, certain you're going to be reaching your goal probably sooner than you know. So thank you so much for taking your time to educate our listeners. And thank you all for taking the time to listen to this. And yes, absolutely, you want to be sharing this because this is serious stuff. And when there's protocols that actually work, there's no reason not to dive in and start feeling well. That's all we want to do, is we want to live the best lives we can. So thank you all so much for joining. Take care, everyone.